So thank you all for being here. This is the panel of experts that we have promised for this workshop at IDC conference called Designing Games for and with Children. We're going to be talking about design methodologies for playful activities. We're going to be talking about my favorite topic, which is games and how researchers create games all around the world. So today I have very much special guests. So with me is Professor Eva Cerezo, Ben Robbins from the UK, and Christine Dottingham from Canada. So thank you all for being here today and for sharing your thoughts with this audience that is basically looking forward to explore more on how do you design the games in your research laboratories and in your daily life activities. So to start, I'm going to basically allow you to give us like a brief introduction on yourselves and your different research activities, and especially the type of research and areas that you cover in your specific duties. I will start with Ben. And for that, I was sneaking in the network trying to get some videos about your work. So Ben, can you introduce yourself?
Right, I'm a senior research fellow at the University of Hertfordshire in the UK, Adaptive System Research Group. I started my research with Kirsten as my supervisor in 2002, and it was specifically about using robots to help children with autism, about social interaction and communication. And since then, since 2002 till now, 2021, I continue the very same thing, using the robot and other systems sometimes, and to help children with autism, and we're now expanding it to other children as well, other type of disabilities.
Great. I also know that you have a background or you have a specific interest in art and movement therapy, so we will go there soon.
Yes, okay.
So now, Eva, I was checking your website and website of your group, and I noticed that you have many different research areas that are super interesting when it comes to design games. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, I come from the University of Zaragoza in Spain. I lead a research group which is named Affective Lab. And yes, the group has different, research areas, but my one especially has been during the last 10 years around tangible interaction and designing games that mixture somehow physical things and digital things. Mostly we have been designing tangible tabletops, we call it Vision, which is a digitally augmented table, specially designed for small children initially, for children from 3, 4, 5-year-old. So we realize that these kinds of tables really digitally augmented with projection from underneath and a camera which tracks the objects, the toys put onto the table, were very, very interesting for those kind of children, because you combine the motor, you develop the motor skills when they are playing your games onto the table, but also the social skills, because many children can play together, yes, at the same time, collocated play. So we have been designing games for this kind of devices for a long time, and now we are also moving for intergenerational games. So in the last years, we are trying to develop games for those kind of devices and in other contexts, also interactive spaces, not only for children, but for children and also their families, and especially their grandfathers and grandmothers. So this is the last things also we have been working in such types of games in the last years.
And we will be back to that specific topic of intergenerational playful, which is a topic that I know Kirsten is also very much interested in, and she also has some work on it. So how about you, Kirsten? Can you introduce yourself?
So I'm based here in Canada, University of Waterloo. I'm the Canada 150 Research Chair in Intelligent Robotics. So the lab here is called Social and Intelligent Robotics Lab. And it's because I'm interested in the overlap between AI and robots in particular, as well as social behavior. So before moving here in 2018, I worked at University of Hertfordshire where, for example, for more than 20 years, I studied robot-assisted therapy for children with autism. And I worked in particular very closely with Ben Robbins, but also other people in the Hertfordshire team, trying to help children with special needs. Here in Canada now, at the moment, we have several projects involving children. One project is about typically developing children and addressing issues such as bullying in schools. The other project is about working with children with special needs with upper limb challenges, a project that tries to encourage them to play with each other and communicate with each other.
That's great, and I hope you guys are also seeing the different videos that I'm showing here, which are basically related to the different research laboratories where Ben, Eva, and Christine have been working through all the time. So to continue, we will just start basically trying to go to the nitty-gritty of this panel. So we're also, we're coming from different backgrounds and trying to meet together and trying to design games that we hope are going to assist or be helpful to a specific task or activity. So, but it's not always clear or it's sometimes hard to track when the origins or when you become starting or started using games in your research. So I would like to start by asking you specifically in your field of research, how and why you are using games in your research. So what about you, Eva? What if you tell us?
As I told you, I hadn't, it was in the group there were different areas around HCI, but then in the context of a PhD, we began to realize, to work around tangible interaction. And as I told, we realized it was very, very interesting for very small kids, that some of the traditional video games were not really very good for them, as they had not the sufficient motor skills, for example, to do with the computers and so on. We began to think about that. And when you are working with 3- and 4-year-old children, then we have to develop, yes, games. In fact, all the activities have to have fun, finally, yeah. So from that point, we began to design really the technology, the devices, the tabletops, but also the activities. And it was natural that the activities were all games or playful activities. And also, even when we have moved to other collectives like the elderly or so, we realized that really games are such a good way even to us in the line of serious games. So our games have always had, also because we work a lot with specialist children and their therapists and teachers. So there are always some issue around therapy and education, but always we try that it has a very important ludic dimension. So when we decided to work with children, that was a natural thing. And also then, as I told you, we realized with other collectives that ludic dimension is essential to motivate, to adhere the people to the therapies and to the activities.
So basically for fun. So that was the why you wrote games, dude.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds, yeah. I guess the story for almost all the researchers trying to bring games into the scene is very similar. I don't know, Ben, I know you have been using a lot of a specific robot that was shown in the video called Casper, that together with Kirsten, you both co-design it and now you're trying to use it. So I'm curious to see, like, at one moment you realize that probably, involving Casper more with games and playful activities would be an interesting way to go.
It was even before Casper, when we started the research. We took the approach that no matter what is our intention and our objectives in the study with the children, from the child point of view, it's playtime, or at least as much as possible. We managed to give we try to give them as much freedom for free interaction. So when I started my PhD, originally it was purely, they know it's playtime. If they want, they play. They don't want, they go out. I had children coming in, running around for 10 seconds and running out. No one forced them to come back to do tasks. And that's how we started. And it was very obviously, as the research progressed, there were more structured objectives and structured game, but from the child point of view, I always try to see it for them to have as much freedom as they can, and freedom they have it through games, and the games more gameful interaction. As we just heard, it's more encourage them to stay, encourage them to take initiative, encourage them, you can reach a lot. Of course, we have different objectives. We have games for specific objectives, therapeutic or educational objectives, but the way we present it to the children, it's always in a playful, as much playful and as much freedom as possible.
And it's certainly more attractive when you ask participants to come to your lab to play something rather than when you ask participants to come and wear some sensors and do some random activities that you need as a researcher.
It's the first time after 18 years that we actually they had to wear some physiological sensor, the wristband.
We will go to the technologies and all the different aspects that we have been using for games. Also, Kirsten, I know now you are in a faculty in the School of Engineering, so you have been also trying to create more robots, so and try to certainly keep doing the things that you were doing with Casper now in a faculty of engineering. And I'm aware of new robots that are coming up in your laboratory, plus the rest of the robots that you have. So I'm also was wondering in this ambient and the scenario that you have here in Waterloo, why did you get attracted by using games in this novel robots that you are also creating?
Actually, before I met you, John, I never talked about games in any of my articles, I think. I talked about play or play scenarios. And because as Ben has already said, it has always been very important for us that the children have fun, that they don't feel forced into doing any activity. Now, games, if I understand that correctly, are much more structured. They have certain rules. There's a certain goal, you can monitor your progress. I think play is much more open, and from a developmental psychology point of view, play is so crucial to child development, not just in learning motor skills or learning how to ride a bicycle, but learning about social interaction, about other people, about themselves, the development of social intelligence, social cognition. So although sometimes people might dismiss play as, oh, that's just child's play, child's play is actually really, really important. Here in Waterloo, a couple of years ago, when a master student, Hamza Mahdi, he got interested in developing, actually building robots. He's a very talented roboticist. And then we were discussing, okay, so we would like to work with children with upper limb challenges. So let's say children confined to a wheelchair and they cannot move their arms very well. What would be interesting for play or for a game for them? And since I'm based here in Canada, where basketball is very, very popular, then we said, can we actually build a robot that children confined to a wheelchair can use to play basketball, even if they cannot move their hands? Maybe they can only move one or two fingers. And so Hamza actually built that robot. It is working now. And so the scenario here is, or the game, if you like, you asked about games, you would have, let's say, two children. Each of them are either controlling their own robot, it's called MyJ, or they both collaboratively control one robot, and then they just try to pick up balls in an arena and shoot them into a particular goal. So the games that I like to develop really need to be things where the robot can have an added benefit. It doesn't make sense for me to use robots for things that the children can do anyway, or they can do with pencil and paper. There has to be this added value to robots facilitating games.
Well, from all this different explanation, it's very clear to me that games seems to be not only a fun, engaging, but also certainly a needed way of attracting people and trying to solve problems with the different technologies that you're using in your research laboratories. And as you can see here, Eva, Kristen, and Ben, they have been using many different, scenarios, technologies, projections, mobile robots, humanoids, haptic devices, tangible devices to basically try to recreate the games that they're using in their research. So now I actually would like to ask you about the process of creating this game. How do you normally do these things once you decide which technology to use? How do you involve, how do you work in the game design process? So Ben, I don't know if you would like to share your opinion on that.
Yes, first of all, as you said, just one sentence before, because you said once you decide on which robot, which technology to use. So on that sentence, there are so many different robots, and I don't believe there is one better than other. Depends who are the users, what they are for, and what are the objectives. Who are the users and what it is for. And then you can use the technology accordingly. Not because you have a clever robot, it means that it will fit with everything. So that's the first point as far as design is concerned. But also, so then designing the games or the activities, always from day one, before you sit, you consult with the users, whether it's the primary users, if you can consult them, or in the case of our children with autism, it was the secondary users, the teachers or the parents. From day one, because then because it does matter. I've seen so many times, and I review a lot of papers, and I've seen, young researchers sitting in the lab and having brilliant ideas, but it's completely, comes in reality, it won't fit the specific user or the specific, and it's again and again and again. So you always consult the users or the people who know. If you're working with children with autism, for example, and we took the challenge to work on the lower end of the spectrum, so a lot of the children don't have language or don't understand you or have very, very limited way of expressing themselves, you consult the teachers and you look with the children as well. And maybe later on in the next questions, I have a lot of examples that I actually pick up the cues from the child and created the game because what I've seen in the child.
Well, I'm glad you were mentioning this because this panel is all about that. This panel is about co-creating these games for and with the children. Eva, I know, some of these images that we're showing here are pretty much related to the processes and all the technology in the place. Yeah. But before you get to that point of putting the technology in the place for running the experiment, there's a lot of design process going on there.
Well, in fact, we try just from the beginning to have not specific ideas. For example, some of the project was focused on ADHD children. So, and that could be an example. So we work with an association of ADHD, yes, hyperactivity and attention deficit children and their families. So what we did was just for the beginning to put one of our devices, our tangible tabletop table, in the center where the children with their families went twice a week or 3 times a week, and just let their device and began to observe. So the first time we just observe how children behave with our technology and the kind of things they try to do. And after this first period of observing the children and also the therapists or the teachers and the things that they told us that they like or they like not, then we begin to think about what to do and what to do that it's really adapted what the children need. Also, because we have been working with special needs children, every children is really a world, yes. So you have to talk really with their with the professionals really that are every day with those children, so that they can lead also you and guide into all the process. And always another big issue for us is that every big design decision that has to be taken, we try not to take as just the researchers, but to design some kind of evaluation session, of play session or session where the children help us to decide. So for example, one of the photographs there, that there are many heads of children playing, yes, just in the middle, that was just such gaming sessions that we, for example, wanted to decide, for example, the manipulation with the objects, with the toys that had to be performed on the table. We don't decide this kind of manipulation. We say the children, for example, we want you to do that, and we observe. We use a lot the Wizard of Oz method. So really it's not implemented, the manipulations or the special gestures they have to do. We just observe, and when they do some kind of gestures, we do such, yes, something in the game or in the activity, so that we can really look, observe, and then implement what the children really like or are able to do. Well.
And that's certainly very interesting. And so some of the more sophisticated trends nowadays in games is something that's called emerging gameplay, in which you just throw the game there and you just wait for players and see how they're going to react to. So I now can see how the potential of using this approach to actually inquiry more into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, very, very, very interesting from that side. I also had two specific pictures here related to, of course, one with Caspar, in which I know, Kirsten, you have been using a lot of also sometimes the Wizard of Oz thing to, basically, or at the very beginning of the design process, maybe to check some things, but then the robot also has some level of autonomy. So I'm just wondering, the design process of these games and playful activities, not only with Caspar, but with all the robots, or what is your approach when designing those?
Well, since you mentioned Wizard of Oz versus autonomy, just to make the comment that to me, robot autonomy has never been the holy grail. With Caspar, for example, but also other robots that you may use, there are different levels of control. You might have, well, actually, we never used Wizard of Oz. We had a keypad that in the hands of the children or the parents or the therapists or the teachers could be used to control the robot in the open, not hidden. So the control was part of the game, if you like. But of course, for a busy teacher or a busy parent, this requires a lot of engagement, and sometimes it is helpful if the robot can do things more autonomously, or we called it semi-autonomous. So certain behaviors the robot can execute itself. Other behaviors, it needs to be triggered by the supervising adult. And then we later also increased even more autonomy, that the robot might even be able to make certain decisions itself on what to do next. But it still needs the human in the loop. It still needs the approval of an adult being present. And why is that important? Not only because of the limitations of robots, they do not yet have human level perception and intelligence and decision making, but also it needs to have the social component. It needs to be people as part of the game. It needs to be people and not the robots that are guiding the interaction and that make the interaction meaningful. So this has always been very important in many projects where I work with children with special needs, to always consider this human in the loop.
Yes, I can add also.
Go ahead.
Also, a very important issue in all these years of research has been also that we try also to explain to the professionals we are working with, yes, the therapists and teachers and psychologists, and so that really we don't try anyway to substitute them. We just want to complement them and to help them to motivate and to do their therapies more efficiency, more efficacy, but not to substitute them. So we don't try just our devices to just let the children play with the devices to do the therapy or the activities and so on. No, that's not really the way or the thing that the technology from our point of view has to be, at least nowadays. So I think it can complement, but always the role of the teacher, of the therapist, of the professional is essential. Not only the design process, that of course, but only then using the device, using the activities, mediating in all the, for example, with the ADHD children, the mediator, so the role of the adult, which is there and leads and guides the play, the activities and so on, is essential, so that it's really useful for the children. Okay.
So yeah, we're all clear in the importance of highlight that this is a complementary way, and you're just trying to provide tools for the healthcare professionals or educators to basically facilitate the work they do when designing these games. And an interesting approach that I see through this, it was certainly a little bit hard for me to understand what are the different roles in which children can be involved. You all mentioned that you try to involve the end users or the secondary users sometimes in the design process. And what I've noticed is through all the many different approaches, you can use children as testers. So you just bring the technology and you ask them to test. You can also use the children as a way to inform your design process, but you're not necessarily involving them in the same one. And we are here in this specific workshop trying to talk about how to involve them as designers, how to empower that design, creative-minded children to basically create games and playful activities. So I just would like to ask, in your own research, the type of research you do, how do you involve them the most? Testers, informants, designers, because all of them, you know, involving them as designers is always interesting, but it's also very time demanding, and it's also, you know, certainly complex. So just would like to know more about that research process in your case. Ben, why do you start?
I want to say, yeah, I mean, with my case, it's not so straightforward because as I said, the children I work with not always can communicate and not only always can express, but from my perspective, from my point of view, always, I take the cue. I mean, I call it with the fingers on the pulse. I see what the child interested in and manage to capture and divert it into a game that will enhance the activity. I tell you very simple but very small example. I remember it because the video you showed in the beginning was a clip of this girl, a little girl, and she used to ignore me. She used to play with Caspar and ignore me all the time. And one day it's all changed, and she started to incorporate me, look at me, smile at me, etc. And we have this keypad that Kerstin mentioned earlier. And the keypad, it's not only to control. Don't think the keypad only as a control for the robot, but it's also something that can be engaged between me and the child together. Give the keypad to the child or ask the child. We have pictures, symbols on the keys so the child can know what each key do, and the child can take initiative to activate specific behavior. And it's become a game between me and the child. I asked her, shall we do this one? And she looked at me smiling and she said no, very mischievously. And I said, okay, shall we do this one? And it's become, it doesn't matter what the robot did or not did, or she didn't, she say no all the time, but it was not the point. The point was she interacted with me. It was a game between me and her. And I said, shall we do this one? And she mischievously laughing and say, no, shall we do this one? And it was a completely game of interaction between you, a child with autism, and a stranger, which is a big step for her. So what I'm saying is to take the cue from the child and then we can design other games accordingly.
Yeah, I think we as researchers sometimes tend to do what you were mentioning, especially young researchers. We tend to believe that we have very clever ideas to create, any type of games that are very sophisticated, and sometimes we don't really need that level of sophistication to basically provide an activity that is playful and enjoyable, can be playful and enjoyable for a specific target population.
So
Yeah.
who is the user and what are the objectives? Not the other way around. Not the technology, wonderful technology that we develop or can develop.
Yeah, sounds good. Kirsten, about this issue of like trying to get a good balance between the time that you would like to spend, of course, designing an experiment or designing an activity, and this thing of involving users or end users as testers, informants, or designers. So I don't know, in your experience, which one is being like working the best for you, or which are the tips and tricks when involving them as informants or designers?
I think all three roles are very important and they all serve a particular purpose. So for example, when it comes to testing, sometimes we might develop systems for children with special needs. But of course, doing actual trials with children with special needs has a lot of, other complexities involved. And I would normally only do that if I'm absolutely sure that the robot works, that the game, at least the game mechanics work, that the experimental setup is okay, everything is being optimized. And then sometimes we do some trials with the typically developing children, bring them to the lab, for example, and just to get some informal results in terms of the testing. And then very, very often the children can verbalize to us what they like, what they don't like, and then we can modify the system. So yes, I would say testing is quite important. And sometimes it is not just bringing a couple of children to the lab. Sometimes we then even work with whole, let's say, school classes of typically developing children to test and to evaluate a particular novel game scenario. Informants is of course very, very important. As we have heard, we need to talk to people. We need to ask them about their opinions. Ideally, of course, co-design, even starting from a very initial idea, I would like maybe such a system with such a goal. The design, well, a lot of work that involves children uses commercially available robots. But there is, of course, a lot of benefit in developing new systems specifically tailored to particular groups of children. Doing this in particular now during COVID-19 has certainly been very challenging.
There isn't a specific section for us to talk about it, so
okay, then I can talk about that later. But also when it comes to co-design with children with special needs, sometimes you need to involve also their parents or their teachers, because as Ben has alluded to, sometimes the children themselves would not be able to verbalize accurately, their thoughts on a particular system. And the parents, of course, are the ones who know the children best. They would best be able to interpret their reactions to a system. So this is what we've previously learned, as I said before, in a project with children with upper limb challenges, who sometimes also had a number of other communication issues. So I would not see these three roles as completely different. In any one particular project, you might involve children in all three roles.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and also, well, I think it's important just from the beginning of the project, yes, to have an idea or to think about the role which are going to have the children in the project. Yes, so and it depends also on the different phases in the development. Perhaps you can involve it in different ways, just as tester, as informants. In most of our projects, children have been working with us as informants, as I told you, yes, leading to the big design decisions, or when we have doubts on how, yes, some researcher wants to do something, the other things, and then it's the time for the children, yes, really to see, to observe them, and to help us. But I would like also to say something about co-design, because, for example, in that ADHD project, we began with that, for us, more or less typical informant role, and then we realized that it could be very interesting to take at least a group of these children and to get them involved as co-designers. But we went to that, or we led to that, not only because our interest on saying what kind of, because there's always a question as researcher that you think, well, I'm really developing some kind of games, of activities, but if the children could develop, for example, activities for that tabletop, which kind of activities which they really develop or design? Which are very similar to the ones that the specialists and the teachers and the therapists, or will be completely different? And that's really interesting for the researchers. But really what make us decide to perform a co-creation with those ADHD children was when we were talking with their families and with their therapists, we realized that even that kind of activity would be very interesting for the children themselves, because also there's an ethical issue. I think with all the researchers that we work with children, there's always some, at least for me, a question, some kind of ethical question of using the children because we need them for our developments. But what it's about the children themselves. And for example, with the special needs children, we always focus in the negative issues. So for example, they have attention problems, in that case of the ADHD, or they are very impulsive. So they have problems also to relate each other, but also they have very positive things also. For example, ADHD children are very creative. Okay, and very open-minded. So we realized that co-creation, some kind of co-creation workshops would be very interesting also for developing their creativity, their social skills, and so on. So I think also these kind of roles can be very interesting, not only from the research point of view, but also from the point of view of these special needs children, for developing and focusing also in their not only negative but positive things. Yes.
And that's actually the following question that I have. You were already mentioning many different challenges that you have when facing all these technologies. There are specific, impairments, or there are specific issues that they may have when it comes to the special needs that a lot of the populations you work with is. So I would like you to briefly mention one or two of the main challenges you see when designing these games, especially when you involve them as designers, which is pretty much what we're trying to cover here in this workshop. So what are those main challenges that you have found? And if you found any way to overcome these challenges, it would be very much informative for a lot of people that are trying to co-create games with them. Kirsten, can you?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, I just like to very briefly add to the previous comment, because I wrote down, in case I forgot at the start of this this panel, that one point I do want to make, that whenever we work with vulnerable people, not only children, this could also be older people with dementia, for example, we need to very carefully think what they get out of our experiments. Yeah. We get a lot out of it. Students get their PhDs or their master degree. We as professors get our publications. What do the children get out of it? Yeah. And this is also a major incentive for me to always make the interactions playful, enjoyable, involve the children as much as possible, so that hopefully when they go home and their parents ask, oh, how was your session with that robot, they have some fun things to tell. And so, yeah, okay. So regarding challenges, yes, for me, since I only moved here in the later part of 2018, of course, COVID was a main challenge, because just when my new lab was up and running, the pandemic hit. So all of my research had to move online, also a co-design study. So for example, Ellie Sanubari, she is presenting here.
Okay, wait, sorry. Sorry, Kirsty. Now that COVID is a very popular topic among us, what if we just try to talk about the specific challenges that you mentioned with COVID, which I know we all have been, struggling a lot in doing this type of research with COVID.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we had to move a co-design study that we planned to do in person. We had to move it online, and Ellie is presenting the results of this here at this conference. Of course, since we could not be with the children, we had to, for example, rely on the parents. The parents at home had to take the role that normally researchers would do when you do a study of co-creation, prototyping, storyboarding, even creating some videos about scenarios, about games that involve robots. So also from the way how we collected data, how we analyzed that data, this has really been one of the main challenges. But on the positive side, I think that some of the things that we learned during that time, well, hopefully COVID will be over at some point, but this could also translate into the future. Since we also learned a lot in, what can be done, even if you do not have direct access to the children.
I know also, Eva, you work a lot with tangible devices and tablets and those things.
Yes, for us that the impact was terrible also because we were, all of our research is about touching things, yes, and getting one and the other the same object and playing together with the objects. So that was terrible. And also because I was telling you that we moved to the intergenerational games, so that in fact we had just before the COVID pandemic, we had some playing sessions in which grandchildren with their grandparents, not only from one family, but with several families, all played together, touching things and sharing things and so on. So of course, with the COVID, that was really impossible. Yes, just thinking in mixing the grandparents, yes, with all that people together. So we have also to move to online experiences, but also because we had such elderly people, really technology was a big barrier, because it's true, for example, because the children were very used to, during the pandemic, also with their schools, they have to move online. So for them, it was quite natural, yes, to use Zoom or Google Meet or something and to share content and all that. But for the grandmothers and the grandfathers, that was terrible. But also, looking for the positive things, that they had a lot of fear, for example, these elder people, but then they realized, okay, they could do it. And they were so proud of themselves. And they were so proud that they could also participate in a game and play with their grandchildren, even online and with technology involved. So they had also very positive feelings, yes, after the experiences. But it was a big challenge for them and also for us as researchers, of course.
I think, as you both mentioned, COVID is, of course, bringing a lot of challenges, but at the same time, it's bringing a lot of opportunities. And I can see that this is pretty much what you're trying to capitalize when putting people to play online games when they were never able to play those. And I like it because this is a very informed panel in the topic of children with special needs. So I know Ben, Eva, and Kristen, you all have been working with this specific population. And one specific message that I would like to, for you to bring to the audience is, what are the main differences and the main kind of like challenges when it comes to design these games with these children with special needs? Many different, it can be ADHD, autism spectrum, or any of others. Once compared to when you work with typically, children with typically developing process. So Ben, I know you have been working a lot with Casper and children with autism. I think he's frozen. So what if you, Kirsten, tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in a certain way, I would say working with children with or without special needs doesn't have that many differences, because after all, they are children. They want to play, they are curious. They like to be surprised, they like to laugh. This is what children are about. Children with special needs, yes, they have special needs. You need to consider that. And yes, they are special. Every child is special. You need to, when you talk about autism, for example, autism is a spectrum disorder. As a psychologist once said, if you know one child with autism, you know one child with autism. So you need to have a very individualized approach, a very personalized approach. You cannot just design a game or scenarios and then hope, oh, okay, this child likes this game. This means all the other children in that group will like it in the same way. That doesn't work. You have to really look at individual preferences, likes and dislikes. So for example, when we work with children with special needs, we need to be very careful not to impose on them a very strict experimental procedure that guides them from one stage to the next. Sometimes because they might be exhausted or a little bit tired or just, you know, a little bit bored. You need to suspend the procedure and go into an entertainment mode. That could mean that you play their favorite song. For example, Casper would sing their favorite song, let's say a Justin Bieber song, or, you know, whatever that child likes. Or if that child likes to play tickle games, where you tickle the robot and then the robot laughs and makes certain, you know, funny gestures, then you might play that game for a few minutes, 5 or even longer, until the child maybe comes down and, you know, is again in a good place, and then you might continue that session, or you might have to interrupt that session if you feel, no, the child is now not in a you know, seems to for some reason, you know, be uncomfortable. You would just have to end that session. You cannot, you know, if I recruit at the university adult participants, then we are telling them, look, the experiment lasts 40 minutes and they expect to sit there or stand there or walk there for 40 minutes. You can pretty much rely on that. If you work with children with special needs, basically suspend all of your expectations on how the session should.
Yes, I think you have to be very, very flexible. In general with children, but in that case more. You have to be very flexible about the duration of the sessions, the aim of the session. So independently of the aim for you for that session, you have to adapt to even the same children every day are perhaps in a different mood, so someday it all goes okay and they want to play for hours, and the other day you don't know why, but they are angry or they are not feeling so good, so you cannot do what you really had planned. So you have to be very flexible. And also, I think another thing Kirsten said, it's very interesting to know about their preferences, their favorite things, so that you can also adapt even the sessions or the themes or all that, what they really love, to motivate them. So it's very important to speak with their families, with the therapists before, so that you know the kind of things they love or they hate, yes, to avoid them or not. And really the most fascinating things is that you never know how it's going to go, yes, the session or the evaluation. So that's really also very nice. And sometimes the most interesting things come out when really the session, it's not going as you plan at all, and perhaps very interesting issues just rise, and then you realize different options, different things, and it's really also very, very nice also, yes, such kind of surprises during the sessions with those kind of children.
Yeah, that makes totally sense for that this difference that we are trying to look between children with special needs and children with more typically developing size. So Ben, we can barely hear you, but I think Yeah, it's a little bit blurry now, but still we can hear you. Unfortunately, we're getting to the end of the panel because I don't want to take more time on Christine, Eva, and Ben. So I would like to thank you for being here. I know Christine and Eva, you have been working a lot with this intergenerational gameplay aspect. So before leaving, maybe also Ben, if you want to, take a couple of minutes and talk about this process of building games for these two generations, because this conference is pretty much about children, but a lot, of course, children, they also are part of the society and they also are part of communities, and we can embrace those aspects, cultural aspects and family in those games. That is also an interesting way to engage them. So Christine, I'm here playing one of the videos of some of the experiments I know you're doing with Pepper and grandparents and grandchildren. I'm also involved.
Do you want me to comment?
Oh, yeah, yes, yeah, just briefly,
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, I mean, this was certainly a project that was most dramatically impacted by COVID-19. Sorry for mentioning that again. But yes, I think this is a very, very interesting, and for me, it was a new direction to go into about 2 years ago when we started this project, since I mean, children, as you know, everyone who works with robot knows, children love robots. You can use this as a big motivational factor, as an attraction for the children, and it provides an opportunity for the grandparent then to collaboratively play with the child under the guidance of the robot. So in this project, our final goal was, we haven't been able to implement it yet. Our final goal was that the robot also actively participates in the interaction. For example, when the pair gets stuck, then the robot might give a suggestion, or the robot might sing a song or tell a story that engages the two players. So in this sense, it would be a triadic interaction. So the robot, an older person, and their grandchild. But I think this is a potentially very, very powerful direction that also other research groups, of course, are investigating.
You mentioned also that you got impact by COVID. You were already preparing the play testing sessions.
Yeah, but also it has been very interesting because we have been performing those kind of online sessions, intergenerational sessions. Of course, not tangible. It was just a new game, just digital game about telling stories and so on between the families and so on. And also we realized, as I told, that it was very interesting because it was the grandchildren which push their grandparents to the technology. The grandparents were very afraid of doing that, but they were so interested in doing things with their grandchildren that they tried and they did it finally. So that young people or children have a lot of potential also to make the elderly people around them to really go into technology. Yes, and forget all their fears and so. But it's really challenging to think in a game that motivates both age groups, and that it's motivating for both of them, interesting, and for us a very interesting thing, because we realized in the first really physical experiences that many times grandparents, grandmothers felt not very comfortable. They felt a little ashamed when playing with technology in front of their grandchildren. So you have to be very careful in how to design the activities so that both age groups feel comfortable and have positive feelings. Yeah, and that's really a challenge. Yes, mostly from the elderly point of view, yes, that they have a lot of fears and they think I'm going to do it wrong and my grandchildren is going to see me that I'm not capable of doing this. So for example, we try to design activities in which the grandfathers or grandmothers were good, yes, some kind of plays or cards games, for example, that we knew that for those people that were more used even than children. so that they feel really comfortable, and I feel that they can even teach their grandchildren to do things, yeah, so that they feel they are, well, this positive and they are useful for their grandchildren. These kind of feelings are very important for them, and it's a challenge when designing the activities.
Nice. Well, time flies when you talk about games, and especially when you play the games. So I would like to thank you, all of you, for bringing all your comments and insights on your research on this topic. And as a last thing, I would like to briefly give you like a message to the young researchers that is just starting with, creating games for children. What would be that one thing that you would recommend them, in a really short manner? Ben, I don't know if you can hear me.
I can start.
Go ahead.
Always think from the eyes of the child on the well-being of the child.
Great, thank you. How are you, Kirsten?
Experiments or data collection or anything.
That's a good recommendation. Kirsten, do you have any other tricks? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to give any advice for graduate students who want to work with or design games for children with special needs, your project will be difficult. It will be time consuming. It might at points be frustrating. You might at some point want to give up, but keep on going, because in the end, it will be very rewarding.
Nice. Eva, you also were about to mention your insights on this topic.
Yes, well, I will say, yes, you have to ask yourself not only what the children can do for your research, but also what your research can do for the children. Yes, also that would be an important issue, yes, to have always in mind. Okay, and you will suffer a little bit, yes, but you will be also have fun also with them, and you are going to be surprised in all the sessions and all the experiences. And when you talk afterwards with their families and they tell you the positive feelings in their children and the positive changes that they have realized in their children, that's so rewarding. That's really it's worth it.
Well, as I used to say, only boring people get bored. So if you're getting bored while designing games for children, so please consider the things and the type of research you're doing. So thank you so much, Kirsten, Eva, and Ben, for bringing all of these insights. And I hope you have enjoyed this panel of experts that we have prepared for you. And see you around during the workshop time.
Yeah,
thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, and thank you for organizing it.
Yeah, sure.